The foundation of self-love is established during childhood. Your ability to develop a healthy, loving relationship with yourself was impacted by the way your parents parented you. How they treated you, the way they talked with you, and how they made you feel about yourself, as well as the beliefs that they have ingrained within you when you are younger. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how experiencing childhood trauma, whether that was in the form of ongoing emotional neglect, or any form of abuse, whether that was narcissistic abuse from your parents or from a sibling or siblings, or whether that was you experiencing religious abuse or physical or sexual abuse, as well as experiencing purity culture, and how the specific traumas that you've experienced during your childhood made you hate yourself. So you may be asking, Lamisha, what exactly did I learn? In terms of what aspects did I learn about myself? You learned about your self-talk, self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, as well as your self-concept, and the relationship that you have with your emotions and how you work through them in your childhood and by the way your parents parented you. If you have experienced trauma in the form of emotional neglect, then all of that affected you and your relationship with yourself negatively. Along with that, if you have experienced any form of abuse, such as emotional or verbal abuse from your narcissistic parents or siblings, or just in general from anyone else, or if you have experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse, or religious abuse, so if you've experienced any forms of abuse that I have just mentioned, then that abuse made you hate yourself as well. Let me further clarify the way your parents parented you and how and what exactly led you to hate yourself. Children see their parents as role models, as well as teachers, such as children will imitate and model the behaviors of their parents. I'm literally talking about everything, the way they talk, how they behave. Even children will observe and try to imitate the relationship the parents has with themselves. So if a parent looks in front of the mirror and calls themselves ugly constantly, then the child learns, oh, that's the kind of a relationship that I should be having with myself. Parents are responsible for meeting their child's emotional and physical needs, such as to make them feel loved and accepted, to make them feel seen, heard, and validated. Children, as we know, are dependent on their parents for love, validation, and acceptance. Parents are responsible for making their child feel good about themselves. So for example, in childhood, parents give their child the example of what love is, what it feels like to be loved, accepted, and validated, what it means and how it looks to receive love. That's where you learned whether to have a healthy relationship with yourself or to have a relationship with yourself, because self-love is cultivated in childhood. You learn about the relationship with yourself by the way your parents parented you in your childhood. For example, if you have experienced conditional love from your parents, then let me explain to you how that impacted your relationship with yourself negatively. Conditional love means love with conditions. So basically, your parents made you feel like you have to earn their love, which made you feel like you have to prove yourself and your worth to be loved by your parents. That you are not loved for who you are, but for what you do for them. Conditional love looks like a child that has to do X, Y, and Z, fulfill the parents' expectations. Then, and only then, the parent showed their child some love and praised them, but it was only in those moments, whether that was little or a lot. Other than that, the parents withheld their love and affection from their child. Part of your parents conditionally loving you was the fact that they didn't teach you how to learn from your mistakes in a healthy way. Instead, they made you feel ashamed of yourself or bad about yourself, or worse, they belittled you for making mistakes. and it made you feel like you're undeserving of their love and acceptance after you made mistakes. They only showed you compassion when you behaved well. They made you feel like you have to be perfect and well behaved and uphold a certain image of yourself that was expected of you in order to be loved and accepted by your parents. As if you weren't allowed to express certain emotions or parts of yourself to be loved by your parents. Which then, when you grew up, you develop toxic perfectionism and you expect perfection out of yourself. And anything less than that, you feel worthless and about yourself when that happens. You feel worthless when you don't meet that level of perfection from yourself, which is a part of low self-worth as well. Like, for example, when something doesn't go the way that you want, you beat yourself up and you judge yourself very harshly, and you experience strong feelings of shame along with that, which is a part of toxic perfectionism. By the way, there's a huge difference between healthy perfectionism versus an unhealthy and toxic perfectionism. And right now in this video, I'm talking about the unhealthy and toxic perfectionism that you've developed from your childhood. And you don't have a healthy relationship with yourself, with making mistakes and learning and growing from them compassionately with yourself, which leads you to have a hard time forgiving yourself and learning from your mistakes compassionately with yourself and loving yourself unconditionally. There is a difference between positively disciplining your child and teaching them manners in a healthy and kind way instead of punishing them or making them feel ashamed and bad about themselves or belittling them for making mistakes. Parents are responsible for teaching their child how to have a healthy relationship with making mistakes and learning and growing from them. Another example of conditional love is the fact that if your parents' idea of love was to love you by telling you or making you feel like you should suppress certain emotions or parts about yourself, then guess what? You're going to grow up having a relationship with yourself where you disown and suppress certain aspects of yourself, where you suppress certain emotions of yourself and deem them as undeserving of your attention and acceptance. Let's take the emotion anger as an example. So you're going to grow up disowning that part of yourself that gets angry, and you're going to push this part of yourself as part of your shadow self, suppressing this part of yourself, and you're going to feel ashamed of that part of yourself because, as I mentioned before, your parents made you feel like this part of yourself should be suppressed, that this part of yourself doesn't deserve to be acknowledged, doesn't deserve to be heard, doesn't deserve to be respected, doesn't deserve to be seen, because you learned in your childhood that in order to be accepted, loved, and receive praise from my parents, I need to suppress certain parts about myself. I need to suppress certain emotions, my needs, my boundaries. Anger is the part of yourself that wants to protect your boundaries. Anger is the part of yourself that tells you that this is not okay. I feel uncomfortable with this. Anger is the part of yourself that tells you when a boundary of yours is violated. This is a very important part of yourself that you have learned to disown and suppress. Another example of conditional love that has led you to have low self-worth is that your parents expected straight A's from you in your exams. And even if you got a B, it was not good enough. They expected only straight A from you. And when you got a B in your exam, you didn't get the same reaction from your parents as when you got a straight A. And so that has made you believe that, you know what, I should always strive for perfection. Anything less than that is not good enough. It means that I'm worthless. They only praised you and showed you love when you received straight A's. Those are the moments when they at least acknowledged you a little bit or a lot, but it was only those moments when you did what was expected of you, when you had to uphold a certain standard that your parents expected of you to have. Anything below that standard, it was not good enough. It was never good enough. You only felt like you mattered when you got straight A's and you showed that to your parents. That's when you felt like you were worthy. That's where you felt like you were good enough. Those were the only moments where you felt a sense of love from your parents. At that moment, your inner child learned that I need to prove myself and my worth to be loved and accepted by my parents. I need to work hard in order to be lovable, in order to be deserving and worthy of receiving love and acceptance. That I don't deserve to be loved unconditionally, that I'm not good enough as I am, that I need to do things to be good enough to feel worthy and deserving of love, acceptance, and validation. That's what you've learned. Those are your subconscious beliefs now, which made you attach your self-worth to external factors, specifically your work and accomplishments, but also just in general to external factors, as in that your self-worth doesn't come from here, it comes from there. Externally, whatever you do, whatever you accomplish, how many tasks you finish, or that score that you get in an exam, that's where your self-worth comes from. Of course, this isn't true, but that's what you've learned in your childhood. That it comes from achieving goals, that it comes from meeting your expectations when it comes to your work or studies. Whenever something doesn't happen the way that you want externally, it has an influence on your self-worth. And that is the danger of you attaching your self-worth to external factors. Many people feel like they are hard to love because they feel like they are not lovable and deserving to be accepted and loved for who they are right now, for being their authentic self. They feel like as if they are lovable and worthy and deserving of love when they do something or when they achieve something, when they get something externally, because your self-worth is inherent. It doesn't come from anything externally. Now, here's an important thing that I want to mention is that if you're feeling about your life and you are disappointed in yourself and your bad habits because you want to be disciplined and a more healthier version of yourself, then you absolutely owe it to yourself to become a disciplined version of yourself, to become a better and healthier version of yourself, to adopt healthier habits, being honest with yourself, realizing that you want better for yourself. And that's why I want better for myself, because I deserve it. I am doing this for myself. However, it should not come from the place of I am worthless, so let me do X, Y, and Z so that I can be worthy. Let me do X, Y, and Z so that I can feel like I am valuable, so that I will not be worthless. It should never come from that place. But the thing is the fact that we do this subconsciously. As I mentioned before, the beliefs that you started to develop in your childhood because of your parents' actions towards you. These beliefs are impacting the way that you go about doing things, the way that you feel about yourself, the way that you think about yourself. It's happening subconsciously. You may not be aware of that, but now I want you to become aware of that, because this is not the place where you should come from when you are making changes in your life and when it comes to yourself. So many people don't realize that deep beneath their need to achieve their goals, they're chasing the feeling of being worthy. They're chasing the feeling of feeling good enough. They're chasing the feeling of being valuable. They're chasing the feeling of being worth something. And that's sad if you think about that. But many people don't realize it. But they're doing this subconsciously. Their subconscious beliefs are driving their actions. People that experience conditional love from their parents, they grow up feeling like they constantly have to prove themselves in their career. They feel like nothing they ever do and achieve is good enough. So no matter what you do, you're going to feel like nothing is ever good enough, because that is tied to your self-worth. Everything that you are going to do, that's going to have an impact on how worthy and valuable you feel about yourself. How good enough you feel about yourself, or the fact that you feel worthless when you don't do something. They grow up feeling like I'm not lovable for who I am. I'm not deserving to be loved unconditionally. I have conditions that needs to be met so that I can be lovable to myself. So now you see the impact of your parents' conditional love towards you and how that caused you to have low self-worth, toxic perfectionism, and a relationship with yourself where you struggle to love yourself unconditionally, an unhealthy relationship with making mistakes, and the inability to learn and grow from your mistakes with yourself compassionately and forgive yourself. How all of that became your idea of what love is. How that became your idea of what your relationship with yourself should look like based on your parents' actions towards you, how they treated you, the way they talked with you, and the way they made you feel about yourself, which impacted you and your relationship with yourself negatively. Now, if your parents compared you to your sibling or someone else growing up, then listen up because this part of the video is for you. For example, let's say you were compared to one of your cousin named Sarah, or your friend, or another child in your school. So let's take Sarah for example. Oh, look, Sarah always does the dishes, you don't. Oh, look, Sarah, she's not picky when it comes to her food. She always eats without complaining. Why can't you be like her? Like, why do you always complain about this or that? Why can't you be like Sarah? Sarah is always better than you when it comes to X, Y, and Z. Why can't you be like her? Sarah is a good girl. Oh, look, Sarah's body. Her body looks healthy and okay. You're too skinny. You should gain more weight. Or you're too fat. You should lose more weight because Sarah's body looks healthy and okay. Oh my God, look, Sarah always gets straight A's. You should also get straight A's as well. Oh, look, Sarah, she always does what her mom tells her to do. You get the point. What makes you think that you are going to have a healthy, loving relationship with yourself growing up? That you are going to be confident, that you are going to have a high self-esteem, or the fact that you're going to have a high self-worth and a healthy relationship with yourself? Like, absolutely no. You are going to grow up feeling like about yourself. You're going to be your own worst enemy. How do I know all of this? The fact that you're gonna have a relationship with yourself and you're gonna hate yourself? Oh, sweetheart, because I've experienced this myself. My parents compared me to someone else in childhood. You are going to grow up hating yourself. That's where you learned to feel worthless. That's where you learned that I should be ashamed of myself. Growing up, you looked around and compared yourself to other people and you felt inferior to them. I'm not good enough. I'm never gonna be good enough. Why are other people always better than me? You will have a distorted view of yourself. You will have a view of yourself that's effed up. You will downplay your greatness. You will experience a lot of self-doubt. You are not going to trust yourself because, well, you don't believe in yourself. It's part of confidence to believe in yourself and your abilities. You will look at other people and see their potential and their abilities and power, but fail to see yours. You will have a lot of insecurities based on what you were told by your parents, as well as what they compared you for, just in general, but also related to specific things. For example, if your parents or one of your parents compared you to someone else's physical appearance, then you're going to grow up feeling very insecure about your physical appearance. Because due to your low self-esteem and all of the things that your parents told you, which made you develop a lot of negative beliefs about yourself, which you now subconsciously believe about yourself, your subconscious mind controls the way that you think and feel about yourself. So all these beliefs are impacting the way that you feel and think about yourself. And if your parents body shamed you or compared your body to someone else's body in your childhood, then you are going to develop an eating disorder. So just wanted to mention something important, which is that if a child has medical conditions or any learning difficulties, such as reading difficulties or speaking difficulties related to reading, writing, or speaking, then that can have a negative impact on the self-esteem of the child as well. Whereas the other children don't have any medical conditions or learning difficulties, it can make the child feel self-conscious about themselves. It can make them feel a little or a lot embarrassed about themselves, especially if other children look at that specific child in a weird way, or worse, if they made some negative comments about the child, then that can impact the child's self-esteem negatively, as well as their relationship with themselves. If the parents are loving and supportive instead of being judgmental, then they can boost the child's self-esteem positively through their love, acceptance, and validation, as well as it can help the child build their self-confidence, and as well as help them develop positive beliefs about themselves, which then later on will impact the way the child will feel about themselves and what they will think about themselves. According to Dr. Gabor Mate, he's an expert in the field of trauma and addictions and childhood development. According to him, trauma is an inner injury, a lasting rupture, a split within the self due to difficult or hurtful events. So basically what he means is that trauma is not what happens to you, but it is actually what happens inside of you. Although the event might have been traumatic, it is what happens inside of you. That's the trauma. According to Tim Fletcher, he's another expert in the field of trauma, complex trauma, and addictions. According to him, although all kinds of people go through traumatic experiences, but not everyone comes out traumatized. And it is because of two reasons. They didn't have the tools to handle the event, and number two, they didn't have the support to help them through the event. And because they didn't have the support and the tools to cope with it, and the only way they coped with it was through fight, flight, freeze, and the fawn trauma response. Trauma is a psychic injury lodged within our nervous system and mind and body, lasting long past the original incident, triggerable at any time. So in psychology, traumas are categorized into two different sections, which are big T traumas and small t traumas. So traumas that fall into the category of big T traumas include abuse of any kind, abandonment, death of a family member, natural disasters, being involved in a war, domestic violence, rape, accidents, or any painful medical injury. Traumas that fall into the category of small t trauma always happens within interpersonal relationships. It always has a relationship aspect to it. So here are some of the examples if you've experienced small t trauma, which are, first of all, experiencing emotional neglect or growing up in a dysfunctional family with constant conflict and drama, being parentified as a child, taking on adult responsibilities as a child and acting like an adult even though you are a child, parents going through divorce or separation, feeling pressure to be perfect and experiencing high academic pressures, growing up in poverty or in a household where your parents financially struggled a lot, parents being really critical of you and making you feel like nothing you ever do is ever good enough. And so I talked about this in this video. Check out the chapter where I talked about being compared to other people. This is also part of experiencing small t trauma, constant negative criticism from your parents. Part of experiencing small t trauma, of course, includes that you became a people pleaser or a codependent when you grew up, and the fact that you developed toxic perfectionism. And also the fact that you have an abandonment wound and either an avoidant or an anxious attachment style, or a fearful avoidant attachment style. So yeah, everything that I just mentioned is part of you experiencing small t trauma. If you said yes to any of these examples that I just mentioned, then you've experienced small t trauma. So according to Tim Fletcher, small t trauma is almost universal in our culture. Over 75% of people has experienced small t trauma, but small t trauma is rarely acknowledged and understood. Less memorable but hurtful, but far more prevalent misfortunes of childhood that do far more damage to the psyches of children. So what he also mentioned is that this trauma is not about the bad things happening, but also the good things not happening, such as the emotional needs not being met. Because when people think about childhood trauma, they think about any of the trauma or traumas that I've mentioned before that fall into the category of big T traumas. But now that we know that small t trauma is less memorable and that people don't even have memories of being emotionally neglected as a child because all they remember is having a normal and good childhood, as well as people don't know everything that's part of experiencing small t trauma, but the only thing they remember is having a normal and good childhood. Maybe you can relate to that as well. So that's the reason why people minimize the effect of emotional neglect, not knowing and acknowledging the effect of this trauma and all of the ways it negatively keeps impacting them and their relationship with themselves in their adulthood. Something else that I've learned from Tim Fletcher, which is that the difference between simple versus complex trauma and how it affected you. So simple trauma is a result of one-time event of big T trauma, results in PTSD with 10 after effects, whereas complex trauma, which resulted from ongoing danger due to either big T trauma or small t trauma, results in you experiencing complex trauma and having 60 after effects. In psychology, there are two types of emotional neglect. One is active and the other one is passive. Just like the word active emotional neglect, it is an active process where your parents actively participated in invalidating your emotions by saying certain statements, or they actively punished you for expressing emotions just in general, or for expressing certain emotions like anger. They might have belittled you, made negative comments about it, or humiliated you and shamed you for expressing your emotions just in general or for certain emotions. A parent that actively invalidates their child's emotions and makes them feel like they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling, and belittling them and making them feel like, no, you are not allowed to cry, you are not allowed to whine, you should be grateful, like other people have it worse than you. If you don't stop crying, I'm gonna give you something to cry about. So these are like some of the examples, and it may ring a bell to you. Passive emotional neglect occurs due to lack of direct action from your caregivers, due to them being either busy. It could have been due to other reasons as well, like dealing with a medical illness or traveling for work very often, or they just didn't acknowledge your emotional states and needs and your mood. For example, here are some of the signs that you've experienced passive emotional neglect. You can read the examples and signs off the screen. I'm not going to talk about it as I'm showing it to you right now. So if you're crying, they didn't say anything to comfort you, or they didn't say anything bad either. So they just chose to ignore you by being quiet or distancing themselves from you because they really don't know how to meet your emotional needs and how to soothe you and how to validate your emotions and make you feel seen, loved, and heard. I don't know your childhood or your parents, so figure this out for yourself. However, whether it was passive emotional neglect or active emotional neglect, both of these types of emotional neglect impacted your relationship with yourself negatively. I was watching this interview of Dr. Ingrid Clayton, author of the book Believing Me, where she was talking about healing from Cptsd, from being raised in a dysfunctional family, from her stepdad grooming her and experiencing narcissistic abuse. So in the video, she said the loss of connection to a caregiver is so severe because we are wired for survival through our connection with these people. I'm just gonna let you process that because that's really big, because that's something that people don't know about and people forget when it comes to experiencing abuse or emotional neglect from your parents in childhood. Let that sink in because it might help you to stop minimizing the effect of experiencing emotional neglect during childhood. When you've experienced emotional neglect as a child, it made you develop these beliefs, which are, I'm not important, I don't matter, and my emotions doesn't matter, I'm not worthy to be acknowledged, I am irrelevant, my emotions are irrelevant, I'm a burden, my emotions are a burden to everyone, I should be ashamed of myself and for expressing my emotions, I don't deserve to have my emotional experience, I don't deserve to have my needs met, my needs doesn't matter, my needs are a burden, there is something wrong with me. This trauma causes you to believe that I am not good enough. I'm not worthy to be loved and heard and acknowledged. The child will also grow up feeling like they are hard to love. According to Tim Fletcher, complex trauma destroys a child's sense of self to the point where they will find their identity in someone or something due to the core identity that develops, which is called shame. When a child experienced emotional neglect, it makes the child believe mom and dad abandoned me or rejected me because I must have not been good enough, because I'm not worthy, because there's something wrong with me. You know, that's the reason why mom and dad did this to me. Otherwise, they wouldn't have rejected me or hurt me. It's because of me that my parents doesn't give me the love that I want. The child comes up with all sorts of reason why they're the reason why their parents emotionally neglected them. It's because of them. That's what the child starts to believe. And that response stems from the toxic shame that you've developed after experiencing complex trauma. When you experience emotional neglect, the child learned to gaslight themselves. It is a defense mechanism after experiencing trauma, so the child learned to gaslight themselves and invalidate their emotions and minimize their experience, just like how their parents made them feel like. Like, for example, that's not a big deal, you're just exaggerating, get over it. Or if it was just passive, still that had an effect on you and you begin to feel like, you know, my emotions doesn't matter, how I feel doesn't matter. So you dismiss, ignore, and invalidate your emotions because of that. Even if you've experienced passive emotional neglect. Developing self-gaslighting from experiencing emotional neglect or abuse during childhood causes a lot of self-doubt and confusion within yourself because you are in conflict with what you think you should do and think and feel versus how you actually feel. You question your own reality and memory. Did I actually feel the way that I actually felt? Like, I felt strongly about this, but, you know, no, actually, that wasn't a big deal. No, I shouldn't be feeling this way. You know, I was just being too sensitive. It was my fault. You know, I was the problem. I'm just exaggerating. Like, maybe it wasn't a big deal. You are making yourself feel like as if your own experience and how you're feeling, you shouldn't be feeling that way. Because in childhood, as I mentioned before, experiencing emotional neglect makes you think my emotions doesn't matter. How I feel doesn't matter. My emotions are irrelevant and I don't deserve to express my needs and emotions. And so it makes you suppress your own true feelings and like be in conflict with yourself about what you think you should be feeling rather than what you actually feel. You will also deny your own reality. You will excuse someone's bad behaviors again and again, thinking, oh no, it wasn't that bad, you know, or you may like think that, oh, am I making this up? Was it actually really that bad? Experiencing self-gaslighting causes you to lose trust within yourself and when it comes to your own judgment, and you will struggle to make decisions later down the line when you grow up and become an adult because you will be in conflict with yourself a lot of the times and internally you will feel a lot of confusion. And that is the effect of self-gaslighting. You will grow up emotionally abandoning yourself and betraying yourself. You will put other people and work before you, resulting in you constantly neglecting yourself and your needs. You may constantly seek the validation, love, and acknowledgement that you never received from your parents through other people by being in connections, by needing to be with people, or through your work, when it comes to constantly pushing yourself and grinding yourself, and through your achievements. And it will lead you to attach your self-worth into external things. So you will feel only good about yourself either by being with people or through your accomplishments. Emotional neglect and abandonment from childhood causes self-abandonment and self-betrayal. And that's the effect of experiencing emotional neglect during childhood. The fawn trauma response, this is the same trauma response that causes people-pleasing as well as codependency, as well as toxic perfectionism. Toxic perfectionism is also caused by toxic shame from experiencing either small t trauma or big T trauma. According to Gabor Mate, he said that the loss of self is the essence of trauma. It made you unable to develop a sense of self. The thing is, how can you develop a sense of self if you constantly were focused on surviving and walking on eggshells, making sure that you are not judged, making sure that you didn't do X, Y, and Z to upset your parents? You constantly suppressed your emotions and your needs, true opinions, because of the fawn trauma response. A child cannot develop a healthy sense of self when they didn't even feel safe to allow themselves to express every single parts of themselves in their environment. The child thought that it's not safe for me to reveal my true self because your child self knew that you are going to be rejected, you are going to be judged, you are going to be punished, or you are going to be belittled. When a child is in survival mode, they will do or say anything to avoid being rejected, avoid being punished, and that's the fawn trauma response that makes you please and please the abuser to make sure that you are not hurt, to make sure that you are protected from feeling and being hurt. How could you be your authentic self when you didn't even get to develop that in the first place? So when you grow up, you will do all sorts of things to prove that I am not the bad child you think I am, that you are worthy, good enough, and you will do this through constant self-improvement and external factors and achievements. People with Cptsd engage in black and white thinking, seeing other people or themselves as either good or bad. And I have experienced this in the past, and I had to unlearn from it, and I didn't even know that that was actually from my Cptsd. When people with Cptsd do a mistake, instead of seeing themselves as, oh, I'm a good person that made a bad mistake, instead of that, you feel like the worst person, or you feel like an evil person, even though you are a good person that just did a dumb or bad mistake. I used to do that in the past, and it was one of the reasons that contributed to self-hatred. Because that ultimately causes a lot of people with Cptsd to feel like I'm the worst person. But instead of learning from it and forgiving themselves, the thing about Cptsd, it's like the black and white mindset. There's no gray area. So it's just something to be aware of, that if you have a Cptsd and you don't even know about that, you've been doing this to yourself. Along with that, people with untreated Cptsd engage in the cycle of self-blame because you constantly keep ruminating on specific memories that are unpleasant, which is a symptom of Cptsd, by the way. Not knowing about this and not finding a solution about the rumination problem can lead to you constantly engage in negative self-talk and judgment and self-blame, which can also cause feelings of guilt, shame, and anger. Please find a solution about this because it really negatively impacted your relationship with yourself as well. A quick summary of everything that I just talked about, of how experiencing emotional neglect made you hate yourself. So experiencing emotional neglect caused you to have a loss of self, experience conditional love, because when you've experienced emotional neglect, you've also experienced conditional love. And growing up, you became a people pleaser, You grew up judging yourself harshly and internally blaming, shaming, and gaslighting yourself, as well as you developed an unhealthy relationship with making mistakes, and you beat yourself up whenever you make mistakes, as well as you've developed a harsh negative self-talk and low self-worth, feelings of worthlessness, damaged self-esteem, self-concept, low confidence, toxic shame, and feelings of guilt, and toxic perfectionism, an abandonment wound, wounded inner child, mother or father wound, or both, which is mommy and daddy issues, by the way. And the negative effects of all of that combined made you hate yourself. I also want to mention something else, which is that you didn't need to treat yourself like trash later down the line for you to hate yourself or for your relationship with yourself to your relationship with yourself already became unhealthy as a child when you've started to experience complex trauma, because complex trauma destroys your sense of self. And how can you learn to love yourself and build a healthy, loving relationship with yourself when you've experienced loss of self because of trauma? And how can you learn to build a loving, healthy relationship with yourself when in childhood all you did was try to act like and be like someone that you are not so that you can protect yourself from being hurt? All of these elements that I've talked about contribute to your ability or inability to develop a healthy, loving relationship with yourself in the first place. And having a sense of self is important. And I will talk about this in another video, not in this video because it will be too long. When you've experienced toxic shame, it already made you feel like I am damaged, I am broken, there's something wrong with me, I want to hide away, I am not deserving and worthy of receiving love and acceptance, I'm a bad person. You constantly work hard and you try to prove yourself. You try to prove to yourself and other people and your parents that you are good enough through your accomplishments or through external factors or by being in connections with people. And that also negatively impacted your relationship with yourself because you feel like I am only worthy and good enough. I am worth something when I achieve something. When I do X, Y, and Z for my parents, when I make my parents happy. Growing up, you learn to betray yourself and your needs. You learn to abandon yourself. So how could you even build a loving, healthy relationship with yourself in the first place when you've experienced that? But yeah, I just wanted to mention this because it's important for you to know that you think, you didn't need to treat yourself like later down the line for you to hate yourself. Your relationship with yourself already was damaged, broken as a child. When you started to grow up and became an adult and you realize, oh my gosh, like what is this? Like why do I feel this way about myself? How am I moving through the world? I feel like just there's nothing inside of me. And that's the thing. Now you see how experiencing emotional neglect led you to hate yourself, how that led you to become your own worst enemy. Something very important that I want to talk about briefly, which is that whether you've experienced any kind of abuse or if you've experienced ongoing emotional neglect during childhood, you have a higher chance of developing an eating disorder or a negative body image, a body dysmorphia, and that can be very unhealthy and that can be very damaging to you and your relationship with yourself as well. If it's untreated and if you're not working on it, then that can really affect you negatively. In fact, a lot of people don't know that they've developed an eating disorder or have body dysmorphia or a negative body image as a result of their childhood trauma. A lot of people are walking around not knowing that this is actually the result of their childhood trauma or the abuse that they've experienced during childhood, as well as addictions to substance abuse. So this is something very important that I wanted to mention, that this didn't just happen because, well, you just decided to hate yourself. These are the negative effects of you experiencing childhood trauma. So yeah, those are and can be the symptoms after experiencing childhood trauma. Now, for the people that have experienced narcissistic abuse from their parents during their childhood and growing up, which means that you have experienced emotional and verbal abuse from your narcissistic parents. Here are the beliefs that you have adopted from your narcissistic parents, such as I am the problem, I should be the one to blame myself whenever I make mistakes. They manipulated you into believing that you're the problem and you should be the one to blame yourself for their mistakes. Because your narcissistic parents gaslighted you and guilt-tripped you to believe that the reason why they say all the mean things and make you feel like about yourself is because of you. It's the fact that you are responsible for the fact that they are making you feel like about yourself and making you feel like you're the problem when it's actually not. It's them. They're the problem. Like you're the one that's responsible for their insecurities, their anger, their disrespectful behavior towards you. You should be the one to blame yourself. That's what they brainwashed you to believe about yourself. And when this happens again and again and again, where they gaslighted and guilt-tripped you to believe that you're the problem, the belief that there is something wrong with me is deeply ingrained within you. Moving on to the next belief, which is that I don't matter. Just in general, as in my emotions doesn't matter, my needs doesn't matter, my boundaries doesn't matter, who I am doesn't matter, as if you are invisible, because that's how narcissistic parents makes you feel about yourself. It's the fact that you are invisible to them. Your authentic self doesn't matter, who you are doesn't matter, your true opinions, boundaries, needs, emotions doesn't matter to them, which in the long term made you feel like there's this deep void inside of you, like this feeling of emptiness and deep loneliness. Because the truth is the fact that who you truly are doesn't exist to your narcissistic parents. You only existed to your narcissistic parents, or you only exist to your narcissistic parents when you try your best to be the role that they have created for you, as in their version of the perfect daughter and son, basically by letting them have complete control and power over you and your life and your decisions, by letting them manipulate you into their perfect puppet. As in whoever they want you to be, however they want you to express or not express yourself, like you cannot go outside that boundary. So as long as you have this persona, they will keep showering you with attention. This persona where you don't have your own opinions, your own boundaries, your own needs. You don't even have a sense of self. Because, well, you don't matter, only what they want from you matters the most. Children of narcissistic parents believe that I'm never going to be good enough. No matter what I do, it's never good enough. Because that's how the narcissistic parents have made the child feel about themselves. It's the fact that no matter what they do, it's never good enough. As well as beliefs like, I should be ashamed of my emotions, I should be ashamed of myself, I should be ashamed of certain aspects of myself. Beliefs like, I don't deserve to have my boundaries, I don't deserve to have my needs, I don't deserve to have my own opinions, I don't deserve to be loved and accepted for who I am, I don't deserve to be seen and heard, I'm not worthy to be accepted, loved, and validated. I should feel worthless about myself. I have to earn to be loved. I have to prove myself and my worth to be loved, accepted, and validated. As well as I have to change myself and my opinions and values in order to be loved, in order to be accepted and validated. I deserve to be punished. Why are other people always better than me? I am useless. I cannot do anything. I am not lovable when I make mistakes. I have to be perfect in order to be loved and accepted. And last but not least, the belief I am hard to love. As well as beliefs like I am not important, my whole being is not important. A deeply ingrained belief that children of narcissistic parents have, which is that they believe that I'm a burden. My whole being is a burden. My emotions are a burden. My needs are a burden. Think about it. The belief I'm a burden. My emotions are a burden. My needs are a burden. How does that make you feel? That makes you feel horrible about yourself, doesn't it? You feel like garbage, that you don't deserve to be taken care of, that you are unworthy to be taken care of. Of course, there are other negative beliefs that you might have developed in your childhood, depending on your personal experiences and traumas and abuse that you might have been through. So just keep that in mind. But I just gave you a general overview of the deeply ingrained beliefs about yourself that stemmed from you having narcissistic parents. You know, narcissistic parents tend to say this to their children, which is like, after everything I've done for you, why are you so ungrateful? You made it hard for us to take care of you. Why you're so difficult? And it makes you feel horrible about yourself. As if that you are a burden, you should be tossed away, the fact that you should not even be here, because narcissistic parents, they use guilt and shame to manipulate you into feeling horrible about yourself. They do this by making you feel guilty. You will feel a lot of guilt and shame about who you are. You will grow up feeling like, I don't deserve to ask for what I want. I am unworthy of my simple basic needs for respect and love, because your parents manipulated you to feel like you absolutely should not ask for your needs. You don't deserve to ask for what you want, that you should abandon yourself and your needs to please other people. And you have pleased and appeased your narcissistic parents for a very long time. And that's where you learn to abandon yourself and your needs and who you are and your values and your opinions. So because you grow up with narcissistic parents, you will feel like you are a burden to everyone. And even the fact that you are a burden to yourself, you may feel like, oh my gosh, no, it wasn't that bad, especially if they manipulated you in very subtle ways sometimes, where you didn't realize the manipulation that was going on. Especially when it comes to that, you may feel like, it wasn't too bad, I'm just exaggerating. You may feel like this when you are starting to heal from narcissistic abuse. Even if your parents were overt narcissists, not covert, you may still gaslight yourself and make excuses for their disrespectful behavior and manipulation. And you may think that, it wasn't too bad, I'm sure they had their own problems. You will grow up invalidating your emotions, dismissing how you truly feel, and even gaslighting yourself. Just like your narcissistic parents gaslighted and guilt-tripped you to feel like you are crazy, you are too sensitive, you're difficult to understand, because, after all they have done for you, they actually did all of these things just so that later they could get their narcissistic supply through you. When you grow up after having narcissistic parents, you are going to say sorry, even in situations where it's absolutely not your fault. Those people that over-apologize? Yeah, you're going to end up being one of those people. They will also immediately blame themselves when something goes wrong, even when it's absolutely not their fault. Because that's how your narcissistic parents made you feel about yourself. They blamed you whenever something went wrong. They blamed you for their disrespectful behaviors and their manipulation. And something else that I wanted to mention, which is the fact that if you were the scapegoat child, or if you are the scapegoat child, or if you were the lost child, or if you are the lost child, you are made to feel like you are garbage that should be tossed away. That's how you'll feel deep down from having narcissistic parents, that you shouldn't be looked at, that you shouldn't be acknowledged. However, if you were the golden child for a very long time, but then you started to break out of the persona of the golden child and you started to develop your own identity and your own sense of self and your own way of expressing yourself, then guess what's gonna happen? You will be treated like the scapegoat child. if you don't live up to their crazy unrealistic expectations or their idea of you, or what kind of decisions you should make about your life. If you go against that, you will be made to feel like you are garbage. The fact that your own way of being is crazy, is insane, is unlovable, for the fact that you stopped being their puppet, for being their narcissistic supply. But if you're the golden child and you are still your narcissistic parents' puppet, then of course you're not going to be discarded like the scapegoat child. The roles can sometimes reverse, where the scapegoat child, when they try to please and appease the parents, the narcissistic parents will treat their scapegoat child like the golden child. And when the golden child starts to step away from the role, either fully or sometimes, they will be treated like the scapegoat child. And so the roles can switch sometimes. Your whole life up until a certain point, you felt like you didn't know yourself, as well as you're easily swayed because you don't have a sense of self. You learned early on that love is manipulation, that love is abuse, that you have to tolerate abusive behavior and them manipulating you, disrespecting you, making you feel horrible about yourself, and the fact that you have to tolerate them judging you harshly, that you have to tolerate giving up who you are, your own sense of identity, and your ability to make decisions on your own, that you need to tolerate giving up all of those things for you to be loved by your parents, that you need to please and please your parents at the expense of yourself, your own beliefs and values. That's what you believed growing up, and it is your birthright to have these rights. But you are made to feel like you absolutely do not deserve to have these rights. You see how that impacted you negatively for a long time? You will feel like empty inside, like there's this deep loneliness and emptiness inside of you from all the constant abuse and stress that the child has experienced growing up from their narcissistic parents. You are made to feel like you are crazy. You are crazy for wanting to be treated with respect. You are crazy for calling out on their bullshit. You are crazy for standing up for yourself. For the longest time, you grow up believing that your self-worth comes from how useful you are to your parents, how useful you can be to your parents, that you believe that your self-worth comes from whatever you can do and achieve to impress your narcissistic parents. But if you are useful to your narcissistic parents, that's the only time where you feel like they pay attention to you, they praise you, they shower you with attention. So children of narcissistic parents are going to grow up hating themselves. They have developed a shitty relationship with themselves because of the impact of all the negative beliefs that I have just mentioned up until this point that impacted your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-concept, your self-confidence, as well as your sense of self and your relationship with yourself negatively, as well as you have picked up the negative ways that they have treated you and you treat yourself in a lot of ways, just like the way your narcissistic parents treated you. And if you're a codependent people pleaser, you're going to get in situations, in friendships, or in relationships with narcissists from the harsh negative self-talk that you have developed from the way your narcissistic parents talked with you and how they made you feel about yourself, such as from all these times you are constantly compared to other people for all the mean things that they have told you about yourself that brainwashed you to feel horrible about yourself growing up, which made you develop an extremely low self-esteem due to their abuse, which also made you absolutely not be able to develop a sense of self. Due to their abuse, you have chronic self-doubt and a hell of a lot of insecurities. Along with that, due to their abuse, you struggle to trust yourself and your own judgment and your own intuition because your narcissistic parents gaslighted and blame shifted their problems onto you to make you believe that you're the problem, that something is wrong with you, that you should blame yourself. And when that happens over and over again, due to their abuse, you have lack of self-trust when it comes to your own judgment and your own intuition. as well as the low self-worth that you have due to them making you attach your self-worth to external things and making you feel like you are worthless if you're not useful to them. If you step away from the role that they have put onto you, you're worthless. Later in your life, the narcissistic abuse that you've experienced made you develop self-sabotaging behaviors. Due to their abuse, you have also developed a distorted view of yourself. Narcissistic parents will compete with their children to make them feel like about themselves. That has led you to feel like you should be in a box, that you should not fully express yourself and fully be in your power, which then impacted your confidence negatively. Along with that, deep down, you feel toxic shame and guilt from all the gaslighting and guilt tripping and blame shifting. So now, because of their abuse, you judge yourself very harshly when you make mistakes. You have now become your own worst enemy and you expect perfection out of yourself because you have unrealistic expectations of yourself. You feel worthless. You constantly compare yourself to other people and you feel inferior to them. Just in general, but also related to specific things that your narcissistic parents compared you to someone else for. If your narcissistic parents compared your body and appearance to someone else by either telling you like you should lose weight or gain weight, or they might have made negative comments about your body or your appearance, and if they force-fed you or withheld food from you, then you're going to have an eating disorder, an unhealthy relationship with food. Also, you're going to feel insecure about your appearance. So that is very effed up. But that's what a lot of narcissistic parents do to their children, is that they will either compare their body to someone else or make negative comments about their body or control their eating patterns or tell negative things about what they eat, how they eat, which can very much make you develop an eating disorder and a body dysmorphia and make you feel insecure about your appearance when you grow up. So not only are you going to grow up with a hell of a lot of insecurities due to narcissistic abuse, but also the specific things that they judged about you, about an aspect of you or a part of your body or your appearance, then you're going to grow up feeling very insecure about that specific part of yourself or a feature of yours. Children of narcissistic abuse believe that they deserve to be punished, even though that's absolutely not true. But that's what your narcissistic parents brainwash you to believe about yourself. And that's very, very damaging. Victims of any kind of abuse will experience self-blame. They will blame themselves for the abuse, for what happened, for their inability to stand up for themselves. Abusers tend to gaslight, guilt trip, and blame shift their victims into thinking that they're the reason why the abuser has abused them, which is effed up, but that's the effect of manipulation, is to make you feel like you're the crazy one, you're the one at fault. When abusers blame shift, basically blaming someone else for your own mistake and abuse, that's what abusers do. You are literally going to hate yourself and feel ashamed of yourself. The abuser has manipulated you into making you feel ashamed of yourself, into making you hate yourself. That was the goal of the abuser in the first place. Now you see how having narcissistic parents made you hate yourself. Your narcissistic parents bullied you. You had real-life bullies ever since childhood and you didn't even realize that. How does that make you feel that ever since childhood you've been bullied, you've been humiliated, you've been belittled? When you have experienced bullying from the very people that were responsible to build your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-concept, and your self-confidence. I mean, that is effed up if you think about it. That is the reason why it hits so hard. So no wonder why you have such a relationship with yourself and so many negative beliefs about yourself. Of course you can change this, but I'm just making you realize and acknowledge the effect that your narcissistic parents had on you. Now, for all the people that had a toxic sibling growing up due to one or both of your parents being a narcissist, then listen up. All of the effects of narcissistic abuse from your parents and the negative beliefs that you've developed that I've talked about earlier apply to a narcissistic sibling as well, or siblings, depending on how many siblings you have. In this video, I'm not going to explain much further about the effects of growing up with a narcissistic sibling, because a narcissistic sibling is no different than having a narcissistic parent. And here, I'm talking about a sibling with full narcissistic personality disorder. And so I don't know your situation or your siblings, so just take this how it resonates with you. Now, the severity of the narcissism could have ranged from low grade to mid-range narcissism or to severe high-end narcissism. And I don't know your situation. You have to figure this out on your own. Just take this how it resonates with you. But yeah, your narcissistic sibling or siblings might have always or sometimes try to belittle you or bully you, and then try to gaslight you into thinking you're the crazy one, you're the one that's too sensitive, you're the problem, and even at times try to humiliate you in front of other people. We are also talking about a sibling that was always in competition with you or extremely jealous, and the spotlight always had to be on them. Something that I want to mention is that, narcissistic parents, they create this dynamic where this competition and jealousy between siblings can occur. The spotlight always had to be on them. So if you want to celebrate something, or if you, were feeling proud about something, they try to take the smile off of your face. They didn't want you to be happy either. They always downplayed your accomplishments. This is a huge one. Like, no matter what you did, it was never good enough to them. They always criticized you and judged you, just like the narcissistic parents. At the end of all, they made you feel horrible about yourself, just like your narcissistic parent or parents. And of course, all of these things made you develop a low self-esteem, low self-worth, toxic perfectionism, made you become a people pleaser, made you be so critical and judgmental and judge yourself harshly because you are internalizing their abuse and everything that they have said about you. You have internalized everything and their abuse, and you are basically now judging yourself harshly. So this is not only the effect after experiencing abuse, which is that you internalize the abuse and now you're judging yourself harshly. Children will make it about themselves that, they're abusing me, they're telling me all these things because I really am those things. You became your own worst enemy as a result of that. You will direct all the anger towards yourself and blame yourself and gaslight yourself. As I've mentioned before, I'm not going to be going in depth about the effects of growing up with a narcissistic sibling because I've already mentioned all the effects of growing up with a narcissistic parent or parents, and so you can just watch that part. But yeah, now you see how having a narcissistic sibling and growing up with them during childhood made you hate yourself. If you're like me and you have experienced religious trauma through religious abuse, then first of all, my heart goes out to you because this is something very difficult to go through. Now, whether that was a religious figure or your parents or another family member that abused you, you might have experienced either emotional or verbal abuse or both. Religious abuse happens when someone used their religion or religious verses to abuse you, to instill fear in you, to manipulate you, to act, think, and live in a certain way. Ultimately, to have power and control over you and your life and your decisions. For the people that are not sure whether you have experienced religious abuse or not, then here are some of the signs that you have experienced religious abuse, which includes you have felt like that the religion was forced upon you. You didn't have the freedom to think and believe what you wanted to. You couldn't think critically and ask questions and came up with your own opinions. You are forced to believe the exact same things the person or people that abused you religiously. According to the articles that I've read and from my own experience, religious abuse also happens when people use your own religious or spiritual beliefs against you. The abusers also could have changed and tweaked and twisted the religious verses to manipulate you as well. Whoever abused you also justified any form of disrespectful behaviors or any form of abuse, such as emotional, verbal, physical, or sexual abuse, or any form of punishments in the name of religious teachings. The abuser might have also threatened you and instilled fear in you by saying things like that you will go to hell if you don't do what they expected of you, if you don't do X, Y, and Z. You are also guilt-tripped, which is they manipulated you by making you feel guilty about yourself. If you didn't do X, Y, and Z in the name of God and religious teachings, you are gaslighted. You are made to feel like you're crazy. You are made to feel like that you are wrong for having your own experience and the emotions that you're feeling right now, as if you're not supposed to be feeling angry about the fact that someone is literally abusing you, or the fact that someone is literally shaming you or humiliating you or threatening you and belittling you in the name of God and religious teachings. They manipulated you to question your own reality and your own judgment and intuition. So every time you felt like, this isn't right, that I'm being punished in the name of God or religious teachings, it made you constantly doubt your own judgment and intuition. And that was the goal of the abuser in the first place. And both of these manipulation techniques made you develop strong feelings of shame and guilt, as well as self-doubt when it comes to yourself, your own judgment, and your intuition. Deep down, you grew up believing that I am the problem, like there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me about the fact that I question things, or there's something wrong with me about the fact that I simply don't want to follow rules that I don't align with, or the fact that there's something wrong with me that I don't fit in with the rest of my family or something, that there's something wrong with you for just simply being you. That's how you grew up feeling. Victims of religious trauma doubt their own judgments and their intuition. They struggle to make their own decisions due to lack of self-trust that was caused by the manipulation due to the abuse. That's how abusers manipulate you, so that you feel powerless and you rely on them for answers and for direction or for whatever it is that you are seeking. You always felt like you had to walk on eggshells, whether it is in your home environment or within the religious organization. You are afraid to speak your mind and even your truth and even expressing your opinions. Experiencing religious abuse during childhood made you become a people pleaser growing up. For the people that experience purity culture during their childhood, then listen up. It impacted your relationship with yourself and your body negatively growing up. You might have experienced purity culture not only at home, but also within a religious organization or even at school when it comes to dress codes. You have to dress modestly, you have to cover yourself up and your body, or else you're not going to receive the love and acceptance from God that you want. Or else guys are gonna have lustful thoughts about you if you don't dress modestly and if you don't cover yourself up. You are taught that you are responsible for how guys feel and what they think based on the way that you dress, based on the way that you act, or based on what you choose to wear or not wear. Which is why this is extremely effed up, and which is why a lot of women grew up with this burden on their shoulder because they feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't cover, then men are gonna stare at me, and men are going to have these thoughts about me. They think that it is their fault, which is what happens when you've been brainwashed. Many women, including myself, grew up with feeling ashamed of myself and my body. All those times when I didn't want it to cover up, all these times when I wanted to express myself through my clothing and I couldn't. If I don't dress modestly, then I will offend God, then I will disappoint God. Or the fact that within the religion, based on the rules, I will not go to heaven if I don't cover myself up, if I don't dress modestly. You were manipulated and being told what you could or couldn't wear in the name of religious teachings and God. You felt like you couldn't dress beautifully because or else men are gonna lust after you and you're gonna feel ashamed about yourself and you're gonna disappoint God. And also the fact that you should be ashamed of yourself for your sexual thoughts because they're sinful, or the fact that you weren't allowed to date or flirt or have crushes because it's sinful, or because you're gonna be punished by God because it happened before marriage. They must have felt so guilty and ashamed of themselves because of something so natural, as well as you felt ashamed for how the abuser made you feel about yourself for wanting those things. You also felt disconnected from your body growing up due to the shame and guilt and the programming when it comes to women in purity culture. You grew up feeling like and believing that your self-worth comes from following all these rules from religion, that your self-worth comes from dressing modestly, that your self-worth comes from being pure, not dating, having crushes, or flirting with anyone. You felt like your self-worth came from that it came from external factors, all the rules that your abuser made you feel ashamed about yourself from not following, and all the ways your abuser brainwashed you to believe you are nothing without this religion. You grew up believing that is where your self-worth comes from external factors, how much that you can do, the ways that you can act, think, behave. Well, we all know that self-worth comes from here, not there. Purity culture causes men to objectify women's bodies, that women's bodies are nothing but temptations, and that men are creatures that can't control themselves and their urges. That's how purity culture makes men feel. Of course, there is more, but I'm not gonna go too deep into it in this video. But it made both men and women feel like there is something wrong with them. Victims of abuse will always engage in self-blame, and they start questioning themselves like, gosh, why can't I behave that way? Or gosh, why can't I just follow the rules? What is so wrong with me? Why can't I just not be like them? Or why can't I just suppress the sexual aspect of myself? This is my fault. I was treated that way because I failed to behave in a certain way. You were brainwashed to feel that way about yourself. You were made to feel like a failure and worthless because you didn't follow the rules within the religious teachings the right way. And because of the manipulation that caused you to feel horrible about yourself, which in now you feel like about yourself. And because you don't know about the fact that, oh, their manipulation and abuse made me feel that way about myself, because you don't know that, you still believe and think that this is all because of you. So it basically caused you to constantly blame yourself, experiencing toxic shame, not even realizing that this is the effect of abuse, that that's the reason why they feel horrible about themselves, that they were never the problem, that the abuser was the problem. And by them making you feel like you need to rely on them for answers, you cannot rely on yourself and your own judgment because it's wrong, because it's sinful, and it made you feel powerless, helpless, and very isolated and lonely. You have grown up suppressing and disowning your sexuality, that aspect of yourself. That part of yourself which now is a part of your shadow self, meaning this is a part of yourself that you feel ashamed of. This is a part of yourself that was rejected, that you rejected. This is a part of yourself that you hate, that you don't like, that you deem as unworthy to be loved, acknowledged, and accepted. Toxic shame causes you to feel worthless about yourself. Religion, or our relationship with God, is something that's very personal. It's something that's very sacred. It's something that's very close to our heart. It is something where we feel safe and protected. It is something that's very important to ourselves. We care about what the higher power that created the whole universe or that created us thinks about us, how he sees us. We care about his opinion of us, right? We hold God's opinion of ourselves in a high regard. Now imagine being brainwashed and believing ever since you are a child that through the eyes of God you are unlovable, that through the eyes of God you are not worthy to be accepted, acknowledged, and loved for who you are, for being your authentic self, that you don't deserve God's love, that you don't deserve God's acceptance just because you didn't choose to follow the religious teachings that was expected of you, or just because you didn't choose to pray 5 times a day, or just because you chose to question these rules and the existence of the higher power when you are a child because you were forced to follow these rules. You felt like there's something wrong with you, that God must have think that I'm a bad person, there's something wrong with me, and that I am undeserving to be loved for simply being myself, for simply having the basic rights of a human being, the ability to choose my own beliefs, my own opinions, whether I want to even be part of a religion or not. These are basic rights, and these were taken away from you, and you felt like there's something wrong with you, that you are the problem, that you are worthless and you are nothing because you feel like you have failed God. And that hit me so hard, and that creates more shame and feelings of worthlessness than anything else. So the abuser or whoever abused you made you feel like you shouldn't be your authentic self because God will not like that about you. God will not like this about you. Or that you are worthless and you are nothing without practicing this religion. And it made you feel like garbage that should be tossed away. My emotions doesn't matter, who I am doesn't matter, who I am doesn't matter to God, then why should it matter to me? Or the fact that you are a bad person because you're not dressing in a modest way, like there's something wrong with you. So do you see how damaging all of that is? Believing that higher power views us negatively and thinks we are unlovable and thinks that we deserve to be punished, and believing that higher power will punish us for simply just being ourselves and wanting to make our own decisions, for not following the religious teachings. And that was very damaging to your relationship with yourself. Religious trauma in the form of religious abuse is a real trauma, just like any other trauma and abuse that I talked about in this video. So when someone twisted religious verses, or if they used God or the original religious verses to manipulate you, to make you feel horrible, ashamed, and worthless about yourself and your body, it made you feel like as if you'll never be good enough, in your own eyes and in the eyes of God, which is very messed up and hurtful and very heartbreaking. So experiencing all of that, what the hell do you think your relationship with yourself is going to be like growing up? It's going to be like absolute Religious abuse causes you to think and believe that if God thinks I'm unlovable, then who am I to think that I'm deserving and worthy to be loved and accepted and acknowledged for who I am? Who am I to think that I am good enough? That I deserve to live my life the way that I want? And that I will not be punished by God for that? Which is why this religious abuse impacted your relationship with yourself negatively. Because it deals with the higher power and God, and how God and a higher power views us, whether we deserve love from God or not. That is the reason why this abuse is effed up, as well as due to purity culture as well. So, to summarize everything, experiencing religious abuse and purity culture during childhood. So not only did it cost you to have a fragmented self, toxic shame and guilt, self-blame, and self-gaslighting, and toxic perfectionism, and for you to become a people pleaser. Everything that I've just mentioned, of course, it negatively impacted your self-talk, your self-esteem, your self-concept, your self-worth, your self-confidence, and all of that combined leads you to have a relationship with yourself, which made you hate yourself. So for the people that have experienced sexual abuse during their childhood, let me explain to you how that abuse led you to hate yourself and also have a negative relationship with your body. If you are sexually abused as a child, according to the article that I've read, children are not developmentally capable to understand or consenting to sexual activity. As well as according to the video I was watching from Kate Morton, where she talked about consent is permission for something to happen or agreement to do something. Therefore, consent cannot be given if we are sleeping, passed out, or frozen in fear, and silence is not consent. I want every victim of sexual abuse to know about this because this is so important, but a lot of victims tend to blame themselves and ask themselves, why didn't I just say something? Why did I just went along with it? You are frozen, meaning you are in the freeze trauma response. And that's not consent. So this is one of the automatic survival response. So you felt like you were unable to move or act or say anything. It's like a deer caught in the headlights, which is why a lot of victims blame themselves for the abuse, not knowing that they were in a survival response. You didn't do this consciously, by the way. It's a psychological response to a threat or danger or an attack. Because to the victim of sexual abuse, it looks like as if they wanted it, they asked for it, or they feel like they gave permission to it when that's absolutely not the case. In other cases, you might have felt like you seemed agreeable. That's absolutely still not consent because you are in the fawn trauma response. This trauma response causes you to appease and please the abuser by suppressing your emotions and needs and disconnecting from it to avoid a perceived threat or danger. For the people that were in a freeze trauma response, that's not consent. Know that your automatic survival mechanism, the freeze and fawn response, was trying to protect you, even though it didn't seem like it. This was your brain and body's way of protecting you. And unfortunately, the freeze and the fawn trauma response causes most of the victims, if not every single victim, to blame themselves. Both of these trauma responses cause the victims to engage in self-gaslighting and self-shaming and self-blaming. They constantly blame themselves and felt ashamed and even disgusted at themselves. Victims tend to feel really angry for all the ways they didn't say or do something or anything, or for seeming agreeable, and all of that combined caused toxic shame. Strong feelings of guilt. And toxic shame makes you feel like I'm a bad person, I am damaged, I am broken, there's something wrong with me. And toxic shame also makes you feel disgusted at yourself as well. Toxic shame makes you feel like I'm not deserving to be seen, loved, heard, and acknowledged. Due to experiencing trauma, you've experienced loss of self growing up. The self-gaslighting made you struggle to trust yourself and your own judgment, and it caused a lot of self-doubt and confusion within yourself. As well as experiencing sexual abuse made you become a people pleaser. Along with that, you developed a low self-worth, negative self-concept, and toxic perfectionism. All of this anger that you are directing at yourself and internalizing from the abuse and the toxic shame and the constant self-blaming, and the effect of all of that made you hate yourself. Something important that I want to share, which is that experiencing toxic shame after experiencing sexual abuse, and that stemmed from gaslighting and blame shifting that either was caused by the abuser or from the people around you or from a certain person that you open up to about you experiencing sexual abuse. Basically, if you open up to someone or certain people about this experience, Or if you confronted the abuser, they gaslighted and shifted the blame towards you, made you feel like you are to blame for this. Either way, the effect of gaslighting and blame shifting from either the abuser or other people caused you to develop toxic shame and constant self-blaming and self-gaslighting. And the effect of both of these manipulation techniques made you internalize everything and made you direct all the anger towards yourself, which then creates self-hatred. Now, even if you didn't confront the abuser about this experience, or your abuser didn't tell you anything about this experience or made you feel like you are the problem, you caused this, or it wasn't a big deal, or if you didn't tell anyone about this abuse, you still experience self-gaslighting after this abuse. And let me explain to you how. According to what I've learned about self-gaslighting from my own experience, as well as from reading a few articles online, what I've learned is that self-gaslighting is a trauma response that's associated with the fawn trauma response. This is an unconscious survival strategy, and if you understand a lot about the fawn trauma response, this will make a lot of sense as to why self-gaslighting stemmed from being in the fawn trauma response. I'm not going to explain further about this in this video, otherwise the video is going to be way too long. But yeah, just wanted to mention that. Along with that, I've read in an article that another reason why self-gaslighting happens, which self-blaming and self-shaming is also a part of, is when you direct the blame towards yourself instead of the abuser to avoid facing the traumatic event and what actually really happened. Because let's be honest and real, it's really painful to acknowledge, wow, this person did this to me, this actually happened. It makes you feel really hurt. So by acknowledging that, a lot of emotions can come up which can feel really uncomfortable. Or you straight up convinced yourself that what you have experienced wasn't sexual abuse, which is self-gaslighting, is you gaslighting yourself into believing and thinking that, nah, that wasn't a big deal and that isn't worthy to be called sexual abuse. And so the self-gaslighting is a way of protecting yourself from facing the truth and not wanting to face and feel emotions that feels really painful that's associated with the trauma. By the way, this is a defense mechanism which a lot of people tend to go through and experience after experiencing trauma. So something else that I want to mention is that victims of sexual abuse also feel a lot of shame when it comes to their body and may even feel disgusted when it comes to their bodies. So victims of sexual abuse feel like my body is not mine. So this is one of the symptoms after experiencing sexual abuse, that it makes you feel ashamed of your body and not wanting to be in your body and feeling unsafe in your body. But yeah, a lot of victims of sexual abuse will develop body dysmorphia or negative body image, and as well as an eating disorder. And so there might be also a feeling of hatredness towards your body. Now do you see how experiencing sexual abuse not only made you hate yourself, but it also negatively impacted your relationship with your body? The people that have experienced physical abuse during their childhood, let me explain to you how this abuse made you hate yourself. Now, the abuser that physically abused you made you feel like and believe that I am doing this to you, I am physically abusing you because of you. Because you are being a horrible, annoying child, because you are making me do this. And that shifted the blame, as in the abuser is not taking the blame, they're shifting the blame onto you and gaslighting you as well, making you feel like you're the problem. The abuser justified the abuse by blaming you and telling you all sorts of things because, oh, if you hadn't done this or if you didn't do this, then I wouldn't have hit you, I wouldn't have slapped you, I wouldn't have physically abused you. They're shifting the blame onto you and blaming you for their abuse and that they're refusing to take responsibility for. The abuser might have also justified their physical abuse in the name of religious teachings as well, or in the name of, we love you, that's why we are physically abusing you. And that is the most effed up thing a child can experience, is being told by their abuser, we love you and that's why we are doing this to you. It makes the child feel and believe, oh, I am really the problem. I am the bad child. I should be ashamed of myself. If I wasn't this bad child, then my parents would love me. Then my parents would have, give me the affection that I crave. This is how the child will feel, as in the fact that they are the problem, because that's what the abuser manipulated into believing. The child will come up with all sorts of reasons why the abuser or their parents are physically abusing them because of them. So that's something that I want you to keep in mind. Your abuser shifted the blame onto you, made you feel like and believe that you are the problem. And this manipulation technique is called blame shifting. They blamed you constantly for their abuse, like if you just didn't act or do that, then I wouldn't have hit you. As for gaslighting, if you confronted the abuser about it, they either tried to minimize what they've done to you, or they completely lied and denied about the abuse, and instead told you all sorts of things to make you question your reality and your memory. So I read this sentence in an article, which goes like, when a child experiences abuse, they don't stop loving the abuser, they stop loving themselves. And that's something that I want every victim of abuse to know and realize and acknowledge, that you blame yourself, you internalize the abuse, and it makes you hate yourself and stop loving yourself. But when it comes to the abuser, nothing happens. Your view of them doesn't change. But when it comes to yourself, it does change. Everything changes. That's something that I want every victim of abuse to know, because I remember when I've experienced sexual abuse, I didn't stop loving the abuser. In fact, I still had a positive view of my abuser, but I felt ashamed and I started to blame myself and I started to feel bad about myself. But when it came to the abuser, my view of them didn't change. So I didn't hate them, but I started to feel differently towards myself in a negative way. As well as victims of physical abuse experience toxic shame, and that toxic shame made you believe that whoever the abuser was, by the way, in your case, that person is right. It was my fault. I deserve to be punished. I deserve to be abused. I'm a bad person. Toxic shame makes you feel like I'm damaged. I'm unworthy of love and acceptance. I feel ashamed of myself. And you may even feel disgusted at yourself as well. That's what toxic shame makes you feel about yourself. As well as growing up, you didn't realize that you were blaming yourself and justifying the actions of the abuser, not realizing that that's the effect after experiencing abuse. So experiencing trauma makes you unable to develop a sense of self. So growing up, you couldn't develop a sense of self because trauma causes loss of self. As well as growing up, you constantly had to walk on eggshells, afraid to disappoint anyone or make mistakes, causing you to become a people pleaser. You developed toxic perfectionism, which is tied to toxic shame and low self-worth, feelings of worthlessness. You grow up with really low self-esteem, negative self-concept, harsh negative self-talk, due to internalizing everything the abuser told you about yourself and how they made you feel about yourself. As I've mentioned before, all of the victims of abuse were manipulated to gaslight, blame, and shame themselves. Experiencing abuse will make you become your own worst enemy. So self-gaslighting and self-blaming and self-shaming caused you to constantly judge yourself harshly and talking negatively to yourself, constant self-blaming in the form that you constantly beat yourself up whenever you make mistakes and you think that everything that happens is your fault, as well as you are going to grow up and blame yourself for someone else's abuse, for someone else's mistakes. That's the effect after experiencing abuse. You are going to grow up and apologize for things that are not even your fault, because internally, you are going to be blaming yourself. You're going to be angry at yourself. You're going to be at war with yourself. And so that's very damaging to your relationship with yourself as well. And all this anger that you are directing towards yourself, internalizing from the abuse and the toxic shame and the constant self-blaming and self-gaslighting and the negative effects of everything that I've just mentioned up until this point made you hate yourself. And of course, something else that I want to mention is that a lot of people, because of experiencing physical abuse, any form of abuse, they will develop either a negative body image or body dysmorphia or even an eating disorder. And so experiencing physical abuse not only impacted your relationship in a very negative way and made you hate yourself, but also it impacted your relationship with your body in a very negative way. So it's just something that I wanted to mention in case that's the case for you, that you've developed an eating disorder or you have a negative relationship when it comes to your body, or you engage in self-harm. Because not everyone may engage in self-harm after experiencing physical abuse, whereas a lot of people may do that and may engage in self-harm. So it will be different for everyone, but they still have developed self-hatred due to experiencing physical abuse during their childhood. Now, if you are bullied in school as a child, that really negatively impacted your relationship with yourself as well. I just wanted to mention that because a lot of people experienced bullying, whether that was during childhood or whether that was when you were a teenager. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Did your childhood trauma make you hate yourself? And the answer is, of course, absolutely yes. You have just found out all of the effects after experiencing emotional neglect and after experiencing abuse during childhood, and how all of the negative effects that you are experiencing right now as you are hating yourself, and you think this is all just you hating yourself. Oh, I just decided to hate myself. I decided I'm gonna treat myself like garbage. In this video, you found out that it was not you that decided to have a relationship with yourself like that. This was the effect after experiencing childhood trauma and how all of that led you to have a relationship with yourself where you treat yourself like garbage. This is your conditioned self. You know, my past self didn't know the fact that I was my conditioned self from experiencing ongoing abuse during my childhood. I was hating on myself, and I didn't even realize that the way my parents treated me and the abuse and the sexual abuse that I've experienced during childhood and the religious abuse that I've experienced during childhood made me hate myself. And all these beliefs, negative beliefs, were developed at that time. It makes me overcome with so much compassion and love for my past self because she didn't know anything. And that makes you really, really, really have compassion for your past self and forgiving my past self. So why did I film this video? Well, as you can tell by now already, it was to help you gain awareness as to why you hate yourself. Because nobody was born hating themselves. And many people don't know about this. They're walking around with the effects after experiencing trauma. I filmed this video to make you aware of when, where, and how you develop this relationship with yourself in the first place, which all started in childhood. Nobody was born treating themselves like a garbage. The conditioned self, as in all of the behaviors, way of thinking, and beliefs that you have adopted after experiencing abuse or emotional neglect during childhood, and this makes your conditioned self, you go about your entire life by being your conditioned self. And your conditioned self is not your authentic self, which is negatively impacting you right now. Something very important that I wanted to mention, which is that I didn't film this video to make you feel like a victim. The fact that for the rest of your life, you have to keep hating on yourself, that you have to stay a victim and feel powerless and feel sorry for yourself for the rest of your life. Absolutely not. In fact, if you hate yourself, today is going to be the day where you decide that that is going to change. Whatever trauma that you've experienced during childhood, you didn't deserve to go through that. But you know what you deserve? You deserve to have a healthy, loving relationship with yourself. You deserve to heal. You deserve to be at peace with yourself. Instead of being at war with yourself and being your biggest enemy, you deserve to be your own biggest cheerleader. And you deserve to have peace in your mind and your heart, and when it comes to the relationship that you have with yourself and who you are. And truly loving that, embracing that about yourself. And be unapologetically you. You deserve that. You deserve to let every single aspect of you shine and be seen and be heard and let it be loved by yourself, by other people that are genuine and have the best intentions for you. You deserve to be loved for who you are. You deserve to discover your authentic self and live your life by your own values. You owe it to yourself as a form of self-love to be your own most unapologetic version of yourself. Your parents might have not loved you, they might have abused you, or they might have gave you conditional love, but you deserve to unconditionally love yourself, and you owe it to yourself. But you deserve to live a life where you are happy with yourself, where you feel the amount of unconditional love that you have for yourself in your heart. You deserve to live a life where you have the healthiest, loving relationship with yourself, where you are your own biggest cheerleader, where you know your worth. My gosh, if you've experienced sexual abuse like me, you deserve to have a healthy, loving relationship with your body. You deserve to feel safe within your body. Instead of feeling like my body is not mine, I should be ashamed of my body. You deserve to live a life where you embrace your sexuality instead of being ashamed of it. And so imagine how free you would feel, how liberating it would be to not give a F, to be your most unapologetic version of yourself, because you love yourself, you value yourself, you respect yourself, because you embrace who you are confidently and unapologetically. You know how freeing that would be? Nobody, literally nobody is going to remind you and tell you to be 100% your authentic self. It is our responsibility to remind ourselves and to realize how important self-love is, because nobody is going to remind you of that. You absolutely can take your power back and not let your childhood trauma impact your relationship with yourself negatively for the rest of your life. Because I did, and I learned how to do that, and so can you. And you can do that on your self-love, healing, and self-empowerment journey. I told you guys how I've experienced ongoing religious abuse and purity culture. My relationship with my parents was not good during childhood and growing up, and that really negatively impacted my relationship with myself. I grew up in a dysfunctional family. There are a lot of other things that I've experienced when it comes to my relationship with my parents that I don't feel comfortable sharing that online. And I respect that. I respect my boundary. If I could describe my childhood, it would be extremely painful and full of abuse and chaos. This one time I also experienced physical abuse where a teacher physically punished me once by beating me with a stick on my hand, and every single student in the class experienced that just because 2 of the students in class didn't do their homework. So that was one time. I experienced sexual abuse twice during childhood, and as well as religious abuse and purity culture, and of course, my relationship with parents that wasn't good. So from all of that, of course, I hated myself. And looking back, of course, I have so much love and compassion for myself. I know how it feels like to have an eating disorder because I've developed that as a result of my childhood trauma. Currently, I am on my recovery journey when it comes to my eating disorder and building a healthy relationship with food. So when I was 14, I've experienced bullying, depression, and it negatively impacted my relationship with myself as well. Then when I was 16, 17, I was in 2 toxic connections with 2 narcissists. I outgrew my friends in class and I was alone, and I faced everything that I was running away from. I learned how to build a healthy, loving relationship with myself. And when I felt lonely sometimes on my journey, and that's okay, I'm a human being, I knew how to self-soothe myself. I knew how to be there for myself, and I knew how to give myself exactly what I wanted to make myself feel better. I had my own back. That's something that I didn't know how to do in the past. I know how to meet my own emotional needs, and I make my inner child happy by listening to her, by acknowledging her, by hearing her, giving the love that she craved so desperately from my parents. And I wouldn't want to be anybody else but the most unapologetic, authentic version of myself. I know who I am and I love who I am. I embrace myself 100%, and I love myself 100%. I want everyone to have this relationship with themselves. And so if I can do that, then so can you. If I can take my power back, then so can you. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. Let me know in the comments down below, what was your takeaway from this video? Be sure to comment down below and let me know if watching this video has helped you in any way, shape, or form. I would love to know that, because on this channel, I'm going to be teaching you how to build a healthy, loving relationship with yourself. As well as on this channel, I'm going to teach you how to step into your power. So if you want to learn all of that, then be sure to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell so that you won't miss out on my new videos that I will upload on this channel. And I'll see you guys on my next video. Bye. Mwah.